with an acknowledgement. On behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'd like to recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional current territories of the Coast Salish people who have lived on and stewarded these lands since time immemorial and continue to do so today. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities. We commit to identifying racist practices and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. With that, I'd like to welcome to any members of the public and visitors. We are happy to make commission meetings open to the public, and please note that the Planning Commission does not advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make the actual decisions. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately directly to elected officials. This meeting is a hybrid meeting with some individuals participating remotely while others are participating in person in the Boards and Commissions room at Seattle City Hall. I'd like to quickly review our Color Brave Space norms.
1 second. There we go.
Thank you. Can I ask for a volunteer, any commissioner who can pick one for us to hold with us through this meeting? Obviously, we'll hold all of these, but one that we would like to highlight. Can I volunteer you, Matt, since you're on, I can see you.
Yes, you absolutely can. Unless you're talking about the other Matt. Let's see. I was going to highlight creating a space for multiple truths while prioritizing and believing the lived experience of racism, in part because I want to center the needs of renters specifically in this. It's a majority of the city, and yet the legislation that we're talking about is mostly being shaped by people who don't have that same lived experience, or not necessarily, mostly homeowners. And so I just want to make sure that we're coming to this conversation from a place that we're really understanding the needs of everyone in the community.
Thank you, Matt. On the agenda today, we have one agenda item, a discussion of interim legislation under consideration by the City Council to implement House Bill 1110. So with that, I'll move towards approving our minutes from the April 10th meeting. Can I ask for a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved. This is Michaela.
Thank you, Michaela. Is there a second?
Matt will second.
Thank you, Matt. Minutes from last meeting.
You froze for a second there, Jamie. I want to repeat the question.
Oh no. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? Okay. If not, all those in favor of approving, say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Any nays? Okay, thank you. Approved. Just some quick reminders. The next upcoming Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting is Thursday, May 1st from 7:30 to 9 a.m. That will be online using the MS Teams platform. And then our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 8th from 3 to 5:30 p.m. That will be a hybrid meeting with folks participating remotely or in the Boards and Commissions room at Seattle City Hall. I'll pass to Vanessa for some announcements.
Thank you, Jamie. As Jamie noted, this is a hybrid meeting. Actually, Olivia Baker and myself, staff to the commission, are here in the Boards and Commissions room in Seattle City Hall. We have no members of the public physically present. We do have a few members of the public on the call. Thank you for joining us. And all commissioners are present remotely using the MS Teams platform. So as a reminder to commissioners to please use the chat function to be recognized to speak. And please do not put substantive comment in the chat, as any members of the public calling in will not have access to see that comment. So we're going to use the chat only to be recognized to speak. A few other announcements, letting everybody know that the May 8th commission meeting that Jamie referenced earlier is going to be a working session on upcoming independent work of the Planning Commission. And a proposed scope of work and questions will be sent to you all tomorrow. And commissioners will be assigned to small groups of 4 commissioners to meet ahead of the May 8th meeting and discuss among yourselves the proposed scope and make any suggested amendments, and then be prepared to speak on behalf of your small group at the May 8th meeting. A reminder of Planning Commission staff time out of the office. Please refer to the weekly that Olivia sent on Monday. John is out this week. I am out next week. Robin is out Friday of next week. The week of May 8th, Robin is out. I am out Monday and Tuesday. Olivia is out Tuesday through Friday. The week of May 12th, everybody's out. And the week of May 19th, everyone is back. So we will obviously have auto replies on our respective emails, but just do keep an eye on the weekly if you want to be reminded who's in and who's out. Lastly, just a gentle reminder to please respond to Robin when she asks if you're attending the meeting or not. By accepting the meeting in Outlook, that doesn't necessarily track back to Robin to be able to know if we are going to have quorum and who's going to be at the meeting. So if you can quickly respond to her and whether you're going to be in person or not, that would be most helpful. I'm going to now turn it over to Jamie to start introductions, and then we'll move into public comment.
Thank you, Vanessa. So if folks can just go around, introduce yourself, your pronouns, the neighborhood you live in, and if you want to say anything about the type of work you do, you can do that as well. So I'm Jamie. I use she, her pronouns, and I co-chair the commission with Michaela. And I live in the future 130th station area, and I work in climate change and environmental justice. And I will pass to Michaela.
All right, good morning. Michaela Daffern, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. And I'll pass it to Deanna.
Good morning, Diana Quintanar, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill. And for my day job, I'm a multimodal transportation planner. And I'll pass it over to Matt Hutchinson.
I'm Matt Hutchins, he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle. I am an architect, but I am also developing a middle housing building, a 6-unit stacked flat in Spokane, Washington. So this bill today, HB 1110, is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to pass it over to Andy.
Hi, Andy Dennenberg, he, him pronouns, live in Northeast Seattle, and I teach at the University of Washington in public health and urban planning. I'll pass it to Zia, I think. I'm not quite sure who.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everybody. Zia Alvarez, she, they pronouns. I live in White Center, Highland Park, and I'm a designer at an architecture firm downtown. Pass to Monica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Central District in Seattle, and my day job is I work in organizing and advocacy around play equity.
and I will pass to Dylan Glasecki.
Good morning. Dylan Glasecki. I use he, him pronouns. I live in the Central District. I'm an architect for Perkins Eastman, working on residential projects and urban infrastructure. And I'll pass to Cecilia.
Good morning. I'm Cecilia, she, her pronouns. I live in the Roosevelt neighborhood, and I work in disability activism and disability advocacy. And I will pass it to Dylan Stevenson.
Hi, my name is Dylan Stevenson, he, they pronouns. I live in the Belltown neighborhood and I teach urban planning at the University of Washington. And I will pass it along to Caleb.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Caleb Twolday, he, him pronouns. I live in Beacon Hill and I work in education. And I think I'll pass it to staff, if I'm correct.
Morning, everyone. Olivia Baker, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm staff to the Planning Commission. Robin?
Robin McGonigal, staff to the Planning Commission, and I use she, they pronouns.
Thanks all. I'll wrap us up. Vanessa Murdoch, I use she, her pronouns. I'm Executive Director of the Seattle Planning Commission. And with that, thanks everybody for introducing yourselves. I'm going to give a little overview of how we take public comment. We have a couple of different ways to provide public comment. In person, joining us here in the Boards and Commissions room in City Hall, or submitting public comment to me via email 8 hours or so in advance of the meeting, or offered on our hybrid meeting platform, which is MS Teams. And if you do care to offer comment during the meeting via MS Teams, please raise your hand in the Teams meeting to be recognized to speak. If you're dialing in by phone, please email me, which is Vanessa Murdoch, that's spelled V as in Victor, ANESSA Murdoch, MURDOCK at seattle.gov, and indicate your name and the phone number you're calling from so you may be recognized to speak. And I'll be happy to read any public comment emailed to me prior to this meeting. I did not receive any, and I'm just checking my email now, and I'm not seeing anybody emailing me, and I'm just going to double check to see if any hands are up from our members of the public joining us, and I don't see a raised hand. So with that, I will turn it back to Jamie. Chair Stroh.
Vanessa, do you still want me to read the public comment guidelines?
We don't need to do that because there are no public comment.
Okay. All right, with that, we are going to kick off our discussion around the interim legislation to implement House Bill 1110. Planning Commission staff are going to provide an overview of the legislation under consideration by the Seattle City Council. Our ensuing discussion will inform the public comment the Commission will offer at the May 19th public hearing on the legislation. We have an hour and 15 minutes for this agenda item if needed. So take it away, staff.
Thank you, Jamie. So I'm going to kick us off and then turn it over to Olivia. We are taking this morning to discuss the interim legislation to implement House Bill 1110, otherwise known as the Middle Housing Bill. This is under consideration by City Council. Please, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so council is taking on interim legislation, is considering interim legislation to implement the requirements of that bill, HB 1110 for middle housing, to meet the state deadline of June 30th. The interim legislation would be in effect for up to 1 year. And that interim legislation also covers 3 other state bills. I'm just going to read them. HB 1293 on design standards, SB 6015 that limits off-street parking, and HB 1287 on electric vehicle charging in new developments. Once the interim legislation is passed, the goal of council is then to take on the legislation for the comprehensive plan and then permanent zoning legislation that will be phased over a number of months into next year. The appeals to the SEPA process for the comprehensive plan, the One Seattle plan, have been dismissed, and council is now free to move forward with the permanent legislation. Next slide, please. Just a note about the legislation timing. There will be a briefing next Wednesday at the Select Committee to discuss the interim legislation. On Wednesday, May 7th, council will discuss potential amendments that they want to bring forward to that Council Bill 120969. Thursday, May 8th, there is a full commission meeting, which we are going to spend the majority of, as I mentioned earlier, talking about what independent work the Planning Commission will be taking on moving into the year. We will also have a brief update on the Select Committee's discussion the day before on possible amendments. The public hearing is on May 19th. Council committee votes on May 21st with a goal of full council vote on May 27th. So once again, this morning's discussion is meant to inform the public comment that commissioners will give, the Seattle Planning Commission will give at the public hearing on the 19th of May. We do not have enough full commission meetings in order to go through our regular letter writing process. And that's why we will instead be providing public comment at the public hearing. I'm going to turn it over to Olivia to walk through components of the interim legislation, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Great, thanks, Vanessa. So I'm just going to provide a few highlights. These are really just reminders. We had a full briefing on the interim legislation to implement the middle housing zoning changes from the Office of Planning and Community Development at our last full commission meeting. So nothing has changed in this legislation since that presentation, but just a sort of a refresher for us all for the framing of our conversation. Council is looking at interim legislation, which only changes the standards that are required by state law or that are addressed specifically in the House Bill 1110 model ordinance that came out from the state. And so the changes that are being proposed to neighborhood residential zones are very similar between this interim legislation and the proposed permanent legislation, which we saw a draft of earlier this year as well, with just a few small differences, such as in how density is measured. For example, in the interim legislation, the density is very much just like to the letter of the law from what was in House Bill 1110, whereas in the permanent proposed legislation from OPCD, there's a bit more of a nuance that is, allows 1 unit per 1,250 square feet, which therefore accounts for different lot sizes in a different way than just allowing 4 units on every lot in neighborhood residential zones or 6 units near major transit, or if there's affordable housing in 2 units. So there's like a few little nuances like that are different, but for the most part, it's similar to what we saw in the draft legislation, the permanent legislation. And there's also, as OPCD noted in their briefing to us, there's a lot of other changes outside of the middle housing zoning that was included in the draft permanent legislation, such as bonuses for stacked flats, a specific affordable housing bonus provision, corner stores, changes to parking requirements, et cetera. None of those are included in this interim legislation. So it's very much just a limited sort of stripped down way to meet the requirements of the middle housing legislation. That's a kind of sort of a refresh on the legislation itself. We wanted to provide sort of a brief issue identification just for your consideration as we discuss what the commission might want to comment on. This is largely building off of information that central staff shared to City Council recently and off of discussions at City Council meetings about the interim legislation. So none of these amendments that are mentioned or concepts have actually been proposed yet, but they're things we anticipate may be raised ahead of this legislation being fully considered by the council. So we expect some of these may come up. just off the top, I'll note that any amendments that are introduced for this interim legislation would have to be reintroduced for the permanent legislation. And so there's, it was proposed to council from central staff that that's something for them to consider, whether it's worth them making changes at this point in time or if they should wait for the permanent legislation. So that's something that they're considering. For some more issue-specific items, one thing that has been raised is stacked flats. Several council members have indicated an interest in helping to incentivize stacked flats. And so it's possible that we could see an amendment that would potentially increase the maximum floor area ratio, regardless of the number of units in a development for stacked flats throughout neighborhood residential zones. That's something that's been discussed. Council members have also expressed an interest in an incentive for homeownership retention as a sort of an anti-displacement strategy. And so it's possible we could see an amendment to incentivize retaining existing homes on a lot for owner-occupied units by allowing potentially another floor area ratio increase. It's also been discussed that there's a conflict in legislation regarding accessory dwelling units. So there is also another bill going through council right now called Council Bill 120949, which is working on implementing State Bill, House Bill 1337. And so that is going through council right now. I believe it's at the Land Use Committee. And in that legislation, ADUs are not counted towards unit density in this upzone for neighborhood residential areas. But in the interim middle housing legislation, ADUs are counted towards total unit density. So those two bills need to be reconciled before council votes on those. And we're not sure which way that decision will go at this point, so something to keep an eye on. Another item that council has raised relates to tree protections through development standards. So there's been a lot of concern raised by members of the public and by council members that increasing density in neighborhood residential zones will impact the tree canopy. And so it's possible we will see an amendment come up to decrease lot coverage allowance or to provide additional development standard waivers to help accommodate existing trees on a lot. There's also been a lot of discussion around mandatory housing affordability and the city's MHA program in neighborhood residential zones. So sort of the discussion that's coming up right now is that inclusionary zoning policies have to be applied when the benefits such as upzones are put in place. So MHA in neighborhood residential zones would have to happen either during this interim legislation or the permanent legislation to upzone neighborhood residential zones. Council couldn't just sort of decide to discuss this later and do it in 3 or 4 years if they wanted to, without adding some other bonus or upzone as to go hand in hand with that. So council members are discussing this possibility, and in particular, Councilmember Moore has commissioned a nexus study on MHA in NR zones, which has gone out to contract, I believe, and is expected to come out later this summer. So we will see what decisions are made based on that. And then finally, there's been some discussion around street improvement requirements. So, currently in certain zones, when new development happens, there are requirements for improvements like adding sidewalks, adding curb cutouts. And currently the requirements for street improvements in neighborhood residential zones apply for 10 or more units. So when 10 or more units are developed at one time. And there was just some discussion or a note from central staff that council could consider changing these requirements given the new planned density going into neighborhood areas as a result of the middle housing bill, and whether they want to change sort of the threshold for those street improvements. So that is all I have. A lot of different things there, but again, just a reminder, none of these have been formally proposed. They've just been discussed, but just a little food for thought as you come up with potential comments you want to share for the commission's public comments. And I'll turn it back to Vanessa.
Great. So again, the purpose of this morning's meeting is to provide this information to you all so that you can discuss what comments you may, as a commission, want to provide at the May 19th public hearing. Again, we don't know at this moment, at this time, what amendments, if any, council members may propose to the interim legislation that has been provided by the executive. We'll have a better sense of that on May 7th. However, we wanted to take the opportunity this morning just to have a discussion on what advice you all may want to give to the city council as they consider this interim legislation. And I would like to underline that this is interim legislation that would bring the city into compliance with House Bill 1110. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jamie. Maybe we want to start with are there any questions from commissioners? If so, put your name in the chat. And also, if there are no questions, let's just jump into your thoughts on the interim legislation that you may want to put forward for consideration of your colleagues.
You're on mute, Jamie.
Oh, yeah. I said the upside of my Teams troubles today is that my chat's working normally. So this is great. So I see Zio has a question, and then Michaela, and then Dylan. So we'll start with Zio.
Thanks, Jamie. And apologies if this was covered either at a meeting that I missed or in this meeting. And I've been on the bus, I'm sorry. But my understanding is that the interim legislation was being considered because of the appeals that were sort of holding the timeline for the comprehensive plan in a bit of like arrears or limbo. And my understanding is that those appeals have been dismissed. And so I guess I'm curious why we're still entertaining interim legislation instead of the complete legislation. And I don't expect anyone on this call to necessarily know the answer to that, but I wanted to voice that as a concern or question.
I can try to answer that, Zio, to the best of my ability. So City Council, you're correct that the appeals have been settled. So City Council is able to move forward, and it was the decision of the Select Committee to continue to talk about the interim legislation instead of putting aside the interim legislation and working on the actual legislation. And I believe that is in part due to the desire to make sure to have the interim legislation in place by the time that HB 1110 comes into play. So that was the decision of the City Council to continue with consideration of the interim legislation.
Sure. Thanks, Vanessa.
Jamie looks frozen on my screen. Oh, and it looks like she might have been kicked out of the call.
So Michaela, I think, is next with a question.
Okay. And this is the problem of early morning meetings, but I see maybe a timeline issue or something I don't quite understand, which is if mandatory housing does go into effect, I mean, I do understand that the upzones sort of need to happen at the same time in order for MHA to apply. But the timeline of the interim legislation looks like it would be passed before the Nexus study is complete. So is it possible that council may choose to act to implement MHA before the Nexus study is published?
I'm afraid I don't have. Go ahead, Michaela.
I don't know if I'm actually making sense. But
you are making sense.
Okay.
And I don't have an answer for that. Given the fact that the Nexus study has been commissioned that is expected this summer, makes me think that perhaps any consideration of MHA in the neighborhood residential zones may be held until the permanent legislation. But I don't know that as a fact. That is something I can follow up with central staff on and get back to you all.
Yes, if you could, because I think that will drive whether or not it's something we should be talking about and commenting on. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaela. I believe Jamie's back on the call.
Yeah, now I'm on my phone because my internet went down.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I believe Dylan Glasecki has a question, and that's all I'm seeing in the chat. And I'll help you monitor the chat, Jamie, given the fact you're on your phone.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. A couple other comments, but I'll hold those. And just general frustration with this whole process. But this is how it goes and where we're at. Question about the street improvement and what the read is on. Does it seem that council is going to be lowering that threshold or increasing that threshold, just in terms of how many units would trigger street improvements?
Yeah, good question, Dylan. I would say that note is coming entirely out of a memo from central staff, not from conversations I have heard in council. So I don't have a great sense of how council members feel about it. But my read of the note in the central staff memo, my interpretation was that they were suggesting that because there is going to be increased density in areas that don't have a lot of sidewalks, for example, or that don't have a lot of that infrastructure, that they would recommend or that there's a potential to need to decrease that threshold so that new development that happens in neighborhood residential zones provides that infrastructure. That's my interpretation.
Was it from a certain council member or is it originated from the staff in general?
I think it was originated from the central staff memo, but I mean that I'm not sure what drove them to include that. It could be other discussions they've had with council that were offline.
And if I could just clarify for commissioners as well as members of the public listening in, central staff are staff that support the city council as a whole, as opposed to the legislative analysts that are specific to each city council member. So the central staff memos that are provided by central staff to city council are both generated by central staff, sometimes in response to a specific question that has come from a specific council member, and sometimes just as a matter of due diligence on central staff's part. We don't know if the central staff, if the street improvement requirements that were noted, this issue that was flagged in the central staff memo, actually it was in response to a council member's question or was just an issue that central staff was flagging. And Jamie, I am not seeing any other notes in the chat. So if there aren't any other questions, if there are commissioners on the call who want to make any suggested comments that will be included in your public comment at the hearing on May 19th, please put your name in the chat and between Jamie and I will recognize you to speak.
So this is your opportunity to kind of let us know what you think we should recommend or what your thoughts are. If you see anything you like here that you want to emphasize, we usually like to start off with the things we like in our letters and then go to the things we'd love to see modified or changed. So I'm also curious because it sounded like there was a lot, there might be some more behind your comment, Dylan. So would love to hear your thoughts too. What's your thinking behind that is.
Olivia, can you go to the previous slide?
I did.
I'm gonna try to add myself to the queue too. It's difficult to type this way, but I will attempt.
So Jamie, what I'm seeing in the queue is Matt, then Dylan, then you. And I just want to check in with Michaela because Michaela had asked that we go to the previous slide. Michaela, can you just give me a thumbs up? Is this the slide you wanted? Great. Okay. So with that, turn it over to Matt.
Right. Oh, so Jamie, we have to start with positive things, right? Just making the devil's in the details, and we don't, since we don't have. My fear is that a lot of the amendments, the things that I've seen suggested as in additional areas for tree protection, changes to the design review requirements, potential street improvements, these are all potential, and MHA for that matter, are all potentially poison pills that are going to have the overall effect of dampening the implementation of middle housing throughout neighborhood residential zones. And so I think that it's a little hard at this point to know what those impacts are. There was the MHA study that models the impact of MHA on current development, kind of puts a price tag in terms of both cost and also reduced supply, reduced new development. That correlates to adding MHA fees. And so it's so not knowing what those fees are, not knowing when it's going to be implemented, not knowing what some of these other costs are going to be, it's really hard to understand within the big picture of how we're going to get how neighborhood residential is going to contribute to our overall need for housing. I think one thing that I would want to be explicit about is that adding these costs, what middle housing does is provide less expensive typologies of housing to flourish. Those are townhouses, those are flats, those are backyard cottages, those are things that aren't as expensive as single family detached houses that are the dominant paradigm. What all these poison pills do is make all those things more expensive, and therefore reduce their benefit as less expensive, more affordable, little a, not capital A, subsidized housing, little a, market produced, less expensive housing. And so I'm quite leery of council's moves to kind of claw back, I think, some of what the supply might provide. And I don't know how we articulate that, having just we're going to just see the amendments, probably 24 hours before testimony, but that's going to be an important lens to view all this stuff through. That's it.
Thanks, Matt.
Dylan,
Jamie, yep, you got it.
I can see the chat, Vanessa. I just have to pull it up.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what Matt was saying. Concerns about street improvement, and well, of course, we desperately need sidewalks. We don't have sidewalks. We desperately need this sort of pedestrian infrastructure, but we don't have it. But putting it as a condition of development in a city where development and building is already so expensive, the number of new housing units that are in the pipeline is drastically decreased. We've got to do something to incentivize development in this, during this time. Mortgage rates as high as they are, all the other uncertainties around the country, just in our current state. Adding onto the impact fees, expanding the MHA, these are all things that are going to make a very difficult development market even more difficult. And we're going to see even less housing come out of it. So as valid as some of these intents are, the reality as to how they're going to play out, like Matt was saying, the idea of a poison pill is what a lot of these will end up being. And this is interim legislation. When developers see that, they see risk. They see this is going to be there temporarily. So the likelihood that developers are going to actually use this legislation and develop a project with the sort of unknown that in 6 months it may change, it may be a better condition for me with new legislation. So I just kind of go back to the amount of energy that I question the amount of energy that should be put into creating a series of amendments for temporary legislation. On the other hand, a lot of these amendments will likely be the basis for what? Future legislation, permanent legislation. They'll probably be the basis for future amendments. So we could see this as kind of a starting point for that conversation. And so that's likely what, these are probably going to be carried on to the future legislation. But again, I kind of case this in this process on top of process, trying to put something temporary in place to meet the state law, and then we're going to change it in 6 months, and that makes very shaky ground for developers. So the likelihood that this actually gets utilized is pretty low because it's not going to stick around for that long. So I guess I case this in, this is all happening very quickly. And so the idea that they're going to potentially expand MHA, potentially do things that are going to really hurt the development market on very short notice without having adequate time to do full study. It's very weary of any sort of proposal that puts additional burden on a developer. So requiring a homeowner to stay in their house, to get certain incentives, again, lowering MHA thresholds, applying MHA thresholds throughout or in our zones, lowering the threshold for street improvements. All that makes me very, weary. And the amount of energy that goes into amendments right now for temporary legislation is also something that I question how much energy should be put into it at this point. I'm curious what others think.
Does anyone want to speak to that particular question before we move on in the queue?
I do, Jamie, but I go next after you. So,
well, I'm going to change the topic entirely, so you are welcome to go in front of me.
Mine was actually related to Dylan. So, Dylan, you could have not articulated it best. So is it okay if I go, Jamie, real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with Dylan G on this topic. And the question I kind of wanted to pose to commissioners is, maybe what we want to make sure we articulate is where the information, where's the data gaps that we need to kind of focus on our attention on what the time will have and the process and the information that will be needed and the strategies that city council and local cities should be exploring to kind of turn these poison pills into non-poison pills, and basically who may have, what are the mechanisms or tools, or where is the responsibility for providing some of these important, kind of investment gaps in infrastructure, for example, right? So, I think we would all agree that we need sidewalks in every single neighborhood. And if they're not available right now, those need to be provided. And if you're going to add density to a particular neighborhood by implementing the House bill, you would want those new residents to have accessible sidewalks near them, right? And at the same time, putting the burden of developing that sidewalk on the developer is kind of that poison pill that Matt was mentioning. So are there ways in which, if a project, right, being implemented to leverage the bill, could there be some kind of shared responsibility on lowering the cost for the infrastructure investments that are needed? And so to me, it's like, there should be further policy analysis and mechanisms to make sure that some of these costs are shared fairly between the development and the city, particularly where we have sidewalk gaps, stuff like that, right? We understand, there's a million other topics such as parking that we've been concerned about, trees, etc. So I agree with Dylan G in terms of, not trying to focus so much on trying to make modifications on an interim legislation, but really be thoughtful and create a list of the key elements that we would like to see studied and understood prior to passing the permanent legislation, but that those should be prioritized in a timeline consistent with informing those amendments in the future.
Go ahead, Michaela.
I appreciate having a diversity of perspectives on the commission who kind of come at this issue with different professional kind of experiences and a lens. So really, really, Dylan and Matt have said stuff in ways this morning that I wouldn't have thought of, and I really appreciate those perspectives and agree with them. And I come at it from the lens of housing choice and these renter households that Matt sort of elevated at the beginning during our color brave space norms. Like what we're trying to do as a city is unlock our neighborhoods for more people. That's inherently what this exercise is supposed to be about. In the past decades, we did a lot of work to unlock these urban villages, and now it's time to take a look at other parts of our city where there's access to great parks, great schools, great amenities, and make sure that folks of all income levels have a chance to live in the neighborhoods of their choice in our city. So I think when I look at these amendments, that's kind of what kind of hurts my heart a little bit, is the potential for reducing the amount of housing that may get produced in these neighborhoods. And for the reasons that have been stated, is that if you don't tailor your incentives appropriately, and you don't, and you make it too costly to do a project, you don't end up getting the development that you need in order to create those housing units and to create that housing choice. Okay, now folks are talking about sidewalks. I feel, I have long felt like the city's reliance on developers paying for the cost of adjacent improvements as the means for doing capital improvements in the city has always rubbed me the wrong way. It has prevented innovation in terms of bringing street improvement projects to communities that on city blocks that don't have any proposed development. And my kind of take on this has always been those residents deserve great street improvements as well. And so, this is probably for another day during the next levy conversation, but I think we as a city should commit to building the infrastructure that we think everybody deserves. If everybody deserves a sidewalk, we as the city should pay for that. So on that one in particular, I really, really, really do want to see more street improvements happen. But I'm not sure it just kind of feels like another kind of way to disincentivize the redevelopment in our neighborhood residential zones, and not actually an intention to create sidewalks, because what it will do is yield no development and no street improvements instead of the actual intent. On the positive side, though, are we excited about the stacked flat incentive? Is that a good thing, Matt? I'm surprised that didn't come up when you were pushed to offer up a pro.
I think that it's. I'm just jumping in here to answer that.
Yeah.
I'm encouraged by the fact that people have identified that as something that they really want to go beyond. But I think there's a lack of understanding about just the headwinds to which stack flats face. It's not just kind of a zoning question. Um, and so I think that incentive is great. Whether it will actually yield a lot of projects, is maybe not a question that just changing the underlying zoning is enough to actually answer. So I'm happy that it's been embraced, but it probably doesn't go far enough on its own to create an adequate incentive for widespread implementation.
Thank you for the additional detail. It's helpful.
Deanna, I'm going to go, but your comments in the chat, I want to remind just like we shouldn't put substantive things in the chat. So I'm going to ask you to voice those out loud after I go. So I was just going to bring up the incentive piece. I think is an opportunity, and I appreciated at least seeing an incentive for stacked flax. The homeownership retention incentive, I think we should always be looking for opportunities to implement anti-displacement policy. And this particular one, I'm not sure if that's exactly like I would like to see more, I guess I would say. Because it's not just homeowners that we should be to the point of like thinking about renters. Like, is there something that can be put in around first right of return for renters that are maybe being displaced from their existing building? Could they have the opportunity to be able to live in whatever new development is going in? Is there some sort of like incentive that can be put in place for if there is a homeowner being developed to be able to have like first right of sale or something like that? Like, is there other things that we can add in so that it's not just for homeowners, but also for our renter populations? So that would be my comment with it. Deanna, do you want to voice your comment?
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to strongly agree with Michaela's discomfort with, the over-reliance on real estate development to address the deficiencies in, public infrastructure investment. And I do think that, we voiced this, I think, in our comments to, the One Seattle plan, kind of in terms of a lot of the density, a lot of the improvements. I can tell you from my professional experience that the cost of sidewalks anywhere in this country, is enormously high, because every time you expand a sidewalk, you have to address drainage, you have to do utility relocation, you got to do so many things, right? To even just grow a sidewalk, a couple feet. And so, on the one side, public projects to address these deficiencies are extremely expensive, and then we try to kind of shift that when developers come to kind of help build those visions and plans for a particular street, right? But I think the problem at hand is we understand that we need to increase density. We should be planning on all the utility upgrades that are going to be necessary to accommodate that growth. And the logical progression is, once we understand, say from SPUs, what their plan is to upgrade certain, kind of storm drain, or, other underground utilities, et cetera, those should be the projects that drive the street improvements, because of course, every time you go underground, you have to dig up and like rebuild, surface improvements. And so the question is there an opportunity to pair, kind of and understand where we might be increasing and materializing the intent of the House bill, coupled where we're going to be having some of these big capital improvements in our utilities, so that that can be offset from the potential of requiring these developments to carry the burden of providing those street improvements and put that tag that cost to the utility improvements that will be in the pipeline. So I just kind of, I think that analysis and thought process of, in time, in the next 20 years, where are those utility improvements coming? Are those aligned wherever we're seeing the potential of, having, neighborhood residential zones take advantage of this House bill? And could that, requirement be in a way waived or reduced, knowing that a particular project could take care of that once it goes into construction? So I just wanted to offer that as a potential idea or mechanism that we need to be considering to reduce those unintended poison pill costs for street improvements.
Thanks, Deanna.
And or thoughts from those that are more knowledgeable than me on this topic.
Any other folks who want to speak up on this? And you don't have to be an expert on development costs, but please put your name in the chat if you would like to speak.
I'm just curious if Matt and Michaela, maybe Matt, since you have that kind of firsthand experience as a developer, like, do you have any thoughts on, is there a way to make sure that we don't, at least scale down some of these unintended poison pills by making sure that the city puts in the cost through planned improvements?
Okay. We can circle back to that question to Matt, but we're going to go to Andy first and then Vanessa.
Great.
Yeah, hi. Just a quick comment on sidewalks. First, that the idea of including sidewalks when utility work is done is good, but it doesn't necessarily get to where your highest priority sidewalks are needed. It occurs where the utility is being done, which could be quite different than where you would say the higher priorities are. Denver recently passed an ordinance that adds to property tax for every property owner, a sidewalk tax fee, whatever they want to call it. But it means there is a large general pot that's really going to make a difference in Denver. And it can't really fit into this bill probably, but I think it's something the commission should consider, whether we would want to look into that more and promote it in the future, whether sidewalks ought to be a city issue as a property tax fee is probably the best way to get it there.
Okay, Vanessa.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, Andy, for that comment on sidewalks. We can track down. I think you sent a link to the Denver legislation, probably not for the interim legislation to be suggested, but definitely something that the commission can continue to talk about. I just wanted to note for members of the public that don't have access to the chat, I did drop into the chat a press release from the mayor's office that came out yesterday, where the mayor is proposing legislation to reduce some of the costs regarding Seattle public utility costs that are associated with new development. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. So just wanted to call that to everybody's attention.
Okay. I see Cecilia is next in the chat and then Zio.
Hi, this is Cecilia. I'm trying to hold my tongue on sidewalks today. I talk about sidewalks all day, and we had so many conversations with Denver, so would love to carry on this conversation later. But yeah, and I agree with all the comments that there's just so much better ways to build sidewalks than taxing, new developments. But I really wanted to bring back to Dylan's comments, and I just like how just like irresponsible it is to like not pass to continue to drag out this legislation and not pass permanent legislation, and just the cost for developers in like actually planning projects that will have on the city. And so would really like our comments to maybe include that, just like how yeah, just the cost that this interim legislation and is going to have on our city and new developments.
Thanks, Cecilia. Zio?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Cecilia and Dylan, and I also think that while this missing middle legislation will expand like more affordable opportunities for homeownership, I think that there's what feels like it's critically missing, especially in these amendments, is just the discussion about affordable housing development in the city writ large. And I think that the reality is that homeownership is going to continue to be sort of outside the realm of possibility as the city becomes more expensive to live in. And we don't know, or I mean, I don't know, someone maybe more literate in this than me on the call maybe does, but I would imagine that the cost of these new units coming online when they eventually do will not necessarily be like lower than some of the options that are available right now. And I think that to Dylan and Cecilia's point, adding time to the development timelines for any of these new units is just going to add to that expense. And so this feels like it's kind of continuing to throw the affordability conversation under the proverbial bus for the sake of I don't know what. But I think that some of these units will end up as rental units, I'm sure. But that doesn't feel like how they're being framed in the conversation. And so I'm worried that many people in the city are still going to be left out of the eventual results of this conversation.
Thank you, Zio. Michaela?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Zio. I think it's really important that we continue to circle back to when we're looking at housing policies to say pragmatically, who is it going to benefit, and what solutions are going to benefit a certain population at scale. And middle housing is not an affordability solution for deeply affordable units. It's more of just sort of a supply side solution to create more choice. And anecdotally, yes, I live in a townhouse complex and 4 of the 6 units are rentals and none of them are affordable. So, you have to make quite a bit of money to be able to rent one of those units. There are a couple of proposals within the comprehensive plan to create and incentivize affordability within neighborhood residential. But I think as we think about how much of our city is zoned for neighborhood residential, and we have to be honest about the limitations of those areas actually meeting needs for people who are, severely housing cost burdened today. At least in the near term, maybe 30, 40 years from now, the house will be affordable. In terms of how we want to approach our public comment, I, I think that if we don't comment on some of these things, it's sort of like saying, well, we would be fine with this if it passed. And so I do think there's still a need for us to show up to the meeting and engage in the conversation and the dialogue. But I think we should think about what we want to say. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I did have like a more salient comment to make on that, but I'm going to go on mute. And if I remember what I wanted to say, I'll come back.
Thanks, Michaela. I'm sure it'll come back. Any other thoughts on how we should be approaching public comment? I think that's a good shift here if we're kind of done about oh, nope, we've got one more comment on the topics. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, this is actually about what our comment should be. I think the difference between 4 units per parcel and 1 unit per 1,250 square feet is a huge has a huge impact. I mean, we have so many lots that are 6,500 square feet, and that means that we're going to be losing 20% of those lots' potential capability or yield across half of our single family or half of our neighborhood residential lots. It's a massive reduction, and I think that it's such a simple clause as an amendment to take. I think that we're going to be stuck with the interim legislation for much longer than we think. I'm just being cynical, but if we're gonna put a stake in any particular amendment or change to the interim legislation, I think it has to be about changing the density to reflect what is proposed in the permanent legislation.
Thanks, Matt. Dylan, go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? I'm kind of in transit.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts, and Matt made a really good point as well. But just in thinking and how we phrase our comments, again, there's a lot of good intent here, as all you guys have raised. There's ideas on displacement, there's ideas on improving sidewalks. These are all great ideas, and I think we should highlight. These are very important issues that we need to address. But and from what I'm seeing, I'm not confident. What little information I've gathered from what these amendments may be, I'm not confident that we're proposing the proper solutions, nor that we have the time to really do that. And if we are going to put energy into an amendment, one that Matt raised, put energy into increasing density in a pretty surefire way, that makes a lot of logical sense, and it's pretty black and white, pretty cut and dry. So I think that maybe we can case our comments by saying that, these are the categories of, addressing displacement and sidewalks, affordability in terms of MHA are all, issues that we need to address. But at least from my point of view, I'm not convinced that the amendments that are being proposed, or not that I haven't read them yet, but that the ideas that are going to lead up to the amendments that are being proposed are going to meet those goals. And so perhaps there's a way that we can kind of case these as listing the important topics that we do want to see addressed, that we're not confident there's adequate time to really get into the weeds on those with this interim legislation. Rather, it would make sense to put energy towards very few amendments one of which is the one that Matt raised, ones that are a little bit of more black and white, like increasing, the number of units that are allowed on a lot, from the baseline 4 to a division based off of the size of the lot, which is what is proposed in the permanent legislation, and would make it easier to move on to permanent legislation in the future. It'd be aligned with our permanent legislation. Anyway, that's just kind of my thought there, as a way to kind of say, council, we appreciate the intent, but we don't think there's really been adequate study to implement some of these amendments that are being proposed. Of course, we have to see what the amendments are before we can make that comment, but that's just kind of where I am at the moment.
Thanks, Dylan. Deanna's next, but after Deanna, I'd love to open to folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet. So if you haven't had a chance to speak, think about if you would like to add anything to the conversation and put your name in the chat. Go ahead, Deanna.
Yeah, I think generally what are our top 4, kind of areas or topics that we'd like to highlight, density being one. What would be our other 2 or 3 that we might just want to make sure are mentioned as a group? Do we have kind of consensus on priorities? Kind of piggybacking on Dylan's point, if we're going to say it's density is 1, what would be 2, what would be 3, and what would be 4 if we have that many that we think are incredibly important at this time?
I think that's a big question. I don't think we have, because this is our first discussion of this, I don't think we have consensus around what the priorities might be.
Perhaps not consensus. I mean, are there any top, anything rising to the surface for folks?
I think what resonates the most with me from this discussion today is that the interim legislation is not the place to try it, and rushing something at the end that would dramatically change something that the city has spent a couple of years preparing and thinking about and putting a proposal together for. The interim legislation isn't the time and place to make those happen. And if they really do want to try and advance some of these, they should be doing it with the permanent legislation. That's kind of that's I think what I was going to say earlier when I raised my hand, a little bit of like, how do we want to comment on this? So I like Dylan's suggestion of affirming some of the underlying intent that we agree with in overarching terms, but then just encouraging council not to act, to sort of tinker and adjust at this stage. And if they're going to do that, to do it with more engagement and a thoughtful process, or a process where we as a commission and the public can see what's being proposed and engage with it before it's adopted. Because I think Dylan's right. Whatever gets adopted with the interim legislation is most likely, or maybe Matt said that, is most likely to serve as the basis for the permanent legislation. So.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly. I like what Dylan was saying about like, here we agree with the principles of like wanting to have anti-displacement policy, wanting to incentivize stack flats, wanting to make sure we have the proper infrastructure in these neighborhoods, right? So and I think framing it as like we are wanting to do the same things you are, but let's be intentional so that we don't implement something that might actually work counter to what you're trying to achieve, right? I think that's the tone I'm hearing from everyone's comments. Would folks be in agreement to that kind of tone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, who would like to add any thoughts or comments? Even if it's just to say, I like where we're going. Be nice to hear from everyone if possible.
I like where we're going. This is Monica.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Okay. I'm sufficiently pausing, I hope. Any other comments? So I think our staff will kind of take all of our conversation and work their magic behind the scenes. And then Vanessa, do you want to talk about next steps?
Yes. So what, this is definitely off the top of my head. I am thinking that our May 8th meeting, I would like to spend at least half of that meeting talking about independent work that the Planning Commission might want to take on in the coming months. I do think given today's conversation and the need for us, Olivia and I, to try to synthesize what everybody said today, where there was a lot of commonality and a lot of consensus around points made. I think we'll take part of the meeting, half of the meeting on May 8th. We'll have a better sense at that meeting what amendments have been proposed. Right now, we don't have the amendments in hand. We just have the issue identification that Olivia brilliantly put together is based on just conversations that we've listened to at the select committee on the comprehensive plan. So by the 8th, hopefully we'll have a better sense of what specific amendments have been proposed. So we'll take time on the 8th, at least half of the meeting, I would say, to refine, give back to you all our synthesis of what we've heard today and continue to refine what that public comment, that you all will be giving on May 19th, and also start to identify commissioners to give public comment. So the hearing, my understanding is the hearing on May 19th will operate weather willing, the same way as other public hearings, in that everybody will have 2 minutes. There will not be a restriction. So we will probably want to have a couple of planning commissioners so that we can be sure to convey your all thoughts over a number of different individuals giving comment on behalf of the Planning Commission. Does that make sense? I'm seeing Michaela cock her head a bit. Yes. Okay, good.
Thanks, Vanessa. Any questions, comments, concerns about our next steps?
I have I guess a quick question, Vanessa. So with the link that you shared yesterday on the mayor's proposed infrastructure cost sharing legislation, I mean, that's a huge topic and great topic, and I think informs a lot of these different discussions as well. And I'm curious if there's an opportunity to learn more about what that will mean and what that looks like. Because I think that's, that may answer some of the things that we've been wondering about and discussing today. It's good news. But of course, I just scanned through this press release. So,
Deanna, great point. It was news to me yesterday when I got the press release, so I haven't had a chance to track it down, but we'll do so before the next time we all convene, and hopefully be able to give an update on that and how the timing of the legislation and where council may stand on that. I would imagine, I can't imagine there being a negative, but I'm not city council, so I will find out more.
thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. All right, if there aren't any other questions, comments, things on this, we may adjourn early, a couple minutes early. Last
Thank
call.
you.
I support
All right. Great. With that, we'll adjourn at 8:54. Thank you all so much for spending your morning together.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, everyone.